Let me welcome everyone. I see that people are coming in. I see familiar faces. It's absolutely wonderful to be able to greet all of you again, and also new faces. So welcome everyone. We have a fantastic event today. We're going to be discussing Alenka Zupančič's book on Disawoval. We have Mladen Dolar, Slavoj Žižek, and Frank Ruda as discussants. So it should be wonderful today, and I'm just delighted that all four of them can be here. Just 2 words. I'm going to have to step out because some of you will be joining me in a seminar at noon, and I've got to get my thoughts together. So I will not be present myself, and I with great regret, I have to say. But I did want to say 2 words since we have a nice gathering here. I want to call attention to the fact that our schedule for the 2025 sessions at EGS is in place. We have a 2-week meeting in Bergamo. We have 4 weeks in Saas-Fee, and then 2 more weeks in Malta, and it's a great lineup, I've got to say. Check it out. And I do want to say something too. Just one word that I'll add 2 words. As you know, the EGS is now a candidate for accreditation at the New England Commission for Higher Education. That means that we're members of that commission, and I'm getting bulletins on a weekly basis about what's going on in Washington with respect to higher education in the U.S. A lot of our community is from the U.S., so this is pertinent. It's genuine chaos at this point, and I just thank heavens EGS is not located in the United States and dealing with some of the political winds and pressures that are underway. I just do want to say that through all of this, EGS is going to maintain its commitments, and we can, which is I suppose a great advantage. Commitments to academic freedom. Commitments to the kinds of material we're bringing, the people and the material we're bringing forward. So we carry on, and I think that's important. And I think that a discussion like this one today is important. So I hope you won't mind my saying those words. We're in a very difficult season, and I do want to assure you that EGS is carrying on. So with that, let me pass the screen to Alenka with my warmest thanks for her book, but also for doing this with us, and also to the rest of our speakers. Thank you so much. Alenka?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chris. And of course, thank you all for being here. First, the comrades that are participating in this discussion, and of course also the public joining us today. So I will simply start this thing with kind of 15 minutes presentation of some of the threads of my argument in the book, and this then will be followed by commentaries of the book by all the participants, and then we can have some general discussion. This is my understanding. So yeah, I'm looking forward to this, and let me start by perhaps saying just a few words on what is meant by Disawoval. I'm sure most of you know exactly, but let's play this game. What is meant by Disawoval? It is a concept that comes from Freud. Verleugnung is the German word, which he discusses primarily in relation to fetishism as fetishistic disavowal, meaning that castration is disavowed by being rationally acknowledged, and the belief in its non-existence is delegated to the fetish. I don't know, the shoe, whatever, the last thing that one sees before seeing that there is nothing or a problem. So then Octave Manoni expanded on this notion from a kind of broader perspective, put it in a broader perspective, and proposed a very succinct formula for its functioning, which you also know. I know well, but all the same, I go on as if I didn't actually know it. So what distinguishes disavowal from denial, from simple denial, is this open acknowledgement of a traumatic fact, I know well, yet this acknowledgement changes nothing in the given situation, hence, but all the same. It's not like this touches me. The status quo so remains completely unaffected. So, and I also detect and emphasize a shift in the contemporary functioning of disavowal, namely a move from its classical formula, I know well, but nevertheless, to something more like, I know well, and I declare that knowledge, make sure that people know that I know. And this is precisely why I can go on then as if it were nothing. So in other words, the very declaration of knowledge starts to function like a fetish object, protecting me from the reality of this same knowledge. In order to efficiently ignore something, I must first openly acknowledge it. So of course, disavowal operates on many levels and serves different functions, which are also difficult to disentangle neatly. It is a coping mechanism, a means of perverse enjoyment, also a form of ideology that sees itself wrongly, I believe, as a no bullshit realist attitude, ready to acknowledge reality without any embellishments. So all these levels are discussed in the book, but some are not. For example, one thing that Manuni also relates further in some other writings also to this, which is theatrical illusion, some religious rituals, and so on. So in relation to what I discuss in the book, I would like to stress actually two things. The first point, the first thing is that my point is not simply moralistic, saying, oh, how terrible we are disavowing all these things. It's not about this, and it is not an analysis conducted from some kind of perspective above all these mechanisms. Instead, it attempts to kind of concretely pursue their social entanglements and disentanglements. So I discuss both the social context and the, let's say, philosophical, ontological underpinnings of anxiety that also may lead to disavowal. So in this vein, I examined the Cartesian cogito, the role of the deceiving other, big other, in establishing the certainty of being, as well as what I call a certainty of non-being. I also explore the role of the deceiving, malevolent big other in conspiracy theories, which are mostly based on direct denial rather than disavowal. There is a difference between the two modalities. I try to expose this difference as well as the entanglement and a strange complicity between them in spite of the kind of seeming hostility between, let's say, the mainstream disavowal modality and the more extreme or picturesque conspiracy theories. So in the second point, although I argue that when disavowal becomes the prevailing social form of dealing with major crises and traumas, it can lead to dangerous and catastrophic results. The point is not that we should instead confront these crises and traumatic events directly or directly realistically. No, the split in the unconscious that makes disavowal so effective is in a way irreducible, but of course it can be deployed and configured in different ways, which all involve some mediation. So it is not a plea for realism or for directly confronting things, but of finding ways of doing this differently than through disavowal. So, and the split that I just mentioned, the split in the unconscious is, of course, the split between what we call the content, let's say, of the repression and the mechanisms, the activity of repression itself. And already in his essay on negation, which was written before the fetishism essay, Freud put this very explicitly, a very brief quote from Freud. He says, in the course of analytic work, we often succeed in bringing about a full intellectual acceptance of the repressed, but the repressive process itself is not yet removed by this. And I think we could say that this split also accounts for the efficiency of disavowal. And let us pause at this statement and kind of highlight how powerfully it resonates, in fact, with the situation we find ourselves in today regarding many of our social-political predicaments. So revealing, displaying, exposing all kinds of hidden, secret, and repressed content seems to have become almost predominant activity. The revelation and display of previously repressed or censored content is in full swing. In fact, an overwhelming amount of such content is now out in the open. So what is happening now? These content are all around the place, as you have just seen, but this doesn't change anything in our, let's say, stance, relation to reality that is being so displayed. And as I said before, there is a certain degree of mechanism of depression, which is being even reinforced by this kind of things precisely, because we are so focused on these revelations and have no time or attention span to focus on the mechanisms of repression itself. So perhaps, I mean, to take some political examples, the most striking political examples of this at this moment are precisely figures like Trump or Netanyahu. They both openly state what should not be said, at least openly, according to the international conventions, let's say, with simply human decency, and yet this does nothing to undermine their power. On the contrary, as already several commentators have observed, this also explains the impotence of the usual weapons deployed against Trump, pointing out the scandalous content of his statement, their contradictions, and I don't know, waiting for him to kind of be engulfed by whatever, the earth. It doesn't work also because obviously this kind of display is Trump's own weapon. But at the same time, we should not underestimate the fact that as head of the world's superpower, Trump is in a position to decide what is right and permissible and what is not. In other words, he is not merely transgressing the laws and norms of Sittlichkeit, he is actively establishing a new big other, a new set of rules and norms. This emerging big others, newly emerging big other, finds nothing scandalous in his statements and actions. It does not even comprehend what we are whining about, so to say, what our outrage is all about. So there is no resonance, this doesn't resonate with anything in this kind of a newly emerging big other. And of course, the attack on the international community, the UN, the various public institutions is part of this building of the new big other, a new frame of reference. Okay, this may prove more difficult than perhaps Trump imagines, as it seems to lead to isolationism rather than globalization or generalization. But at the same time, we should not deceive ourselves about the importance of this moment when a real global struggle for a new big other is in full swing. In Europe, for example, there are many signs that the increasingly popular far right is also eager to embrace precisely this way functioning with or without Trump. Moreover, this is not simply about changing the values that constitute, let's say, this new big other. More fundamentally, it concerns how this happens, I mean, through the sheer argument and display of power. I will do it because I can. I mean, this is the bottom line argument. I can do whatever I want. Nobody can stop me. Or if we paraphrase Kant, there is no moral law in me or starry heaven above me. I am the moral law and the starry heaven. Just watch me. So, and of course, there is also an unmistakable enjoyment in this direct display of power, as well as an implicit promise that his supporters will somehow partake in this power and its enjoyment, that they will have fun. And you will probably recall just before the inauguration celebrations, Trump promised people one thing, that they would have so much fun, he said, watching it and so on. He promised them great fun, an orgy of fun. And what was his first dismissive comment on the critical speech by Washington Bishop Marion Buddy, it was that it was terribly boring. So this is the frame of political choices, or that we have fun or boring. And indeed, boredom is the last thing that comes to mind regarding Trump's rule now, which includes, of course, the ongoing parade of executive orders. And actually, this strongly reminds of what Genet stages so powerful in Balcony. It is the kind of obscenity that what we have just seen a moment ago cannot compete with, I guess. We can display all these images, but the obscenity that goes on right now is something much more troubling. So regarding Genet and how what he writes in Balcony or what he anticipates there is really interesting. I wrote about this several years ago, about how his portrayal of this kind of a new functioning of power, new figures of power, which are there essentially brothel clients, aligns with what we are witnessing now. Just two quotes from the play shall suffice. First quote is something that comes from the chief of police, who is a kind of a central figure in this reconfiguration of power into a new kind of power. He says at the end, though my image be castrated in every brothel in the world, I remain intact, gentlemen. And he says this while putting his hand on his balls. And this is certainly, this kind of statement is certainly different from the classical logic of symbolic power, where, for instance, disgracing the king's image meant disgracing the king himself, and where respecting the form was essential. The new logic is as follows: let the image be castrated in all possible ways, while I continue to do whatever I please. And I think not only do we see this dynamic with Trump all the time, but he also articulated quite explicitly, recall the famous, unfamous statement when he said, I could stand in the middle of the Fifth Avenue and shoot someone and I wouldn't lose any voters. And then a second quote from Genet, this comes from the mouth of the bishop, which is one of the three figures of power, bishop, the general, and the judge. But it describes how they will function now in this new regime. He says, it lies with us for this masquerade to change meaning. We must act fast and with precision, no errors allowed, with authority. As for me, instead of being merely the symbolic head of the country's church, I have decided to become its actual head. Instead of blessing and blessing until I've held my fill, I'm going to sign decrees and appoint priests. The clergy is being organized, a basilica is under construction, and so on. So I think you can see the similarities here. There is one decree after another, one decree after another. So I will briefly wrap up this presentation by saying that Disawoval has played, I think, a crucial role in this turn of events as a mechanism precisely through which the mainstream politics protected itself against its own repressed, which is now returning in the form of precisely leaders like Trump. As Slavoj put it already, for Democrats, Trump functioned all the way through the campaign and before exactly as the Freudian fetish functions in Disawoval. He was the last thing they saw before seeing the class struggle. So they clung to this fetish, focusing solely on Trump and his figure and almost on nothing else. And this now continues today, albeit in a slightly different form. Now Trump is there in power again, and the Disawoval now perhaps concerns the danger that he is believed to present or not. We can see, for example, when we can see some very strong wording, such as fascism, is being used to refer to Trump's politics, yet without any appropriate political response adequate to such strong claims. I mean, you don't just scream fascism and then go on exactly as before without mobilizing and organizing in unprecedented ways. And of course, this remark is valid for Europe and what is emerging here as much as for the States. To say nothing about the morbidly sickening, grotesque form that this is taking in the case of Palestine and the Middle East. So, of course, and I will finish with this, there are debates whether fascism is the right word to describe what is going on, but perhaps an even more important question that we should ask ourselves is this. We say fascism, but do we really believe it? Okay, thank you. This is all from me for the time being.
Yeah, I'm going to follow up on this, and thank you for letting me be here. I mean, this meeting just has been raided, and it feels like a lot of meetings, maybe every meeting has been raided. We're living in a times of raided meetings, strangely, and where not only new sheriffs are in town, but also new crooks, and they're hard to distinguish sometimes. I mean, that was quite visibly identifiable, but thinking of a politics of boredom, as Alenka just mentioned, would be, I think, an interesting way of approaching this, especially I think boredom, and Martin Heidegger, who thinks that this is one of the most profound metaphysical actually affects or sentiments or states to be in. But that was just a quick reaction to the raid. I would like, I'm going to speak for about 12, 13 minutes. I would like to begin praising Alenka's glorious book by noting that we are dealing with what what directly speaks not to, but I think, as Alenka just has underlined, of the present moment. It is, in the sense, its own time captured, our own time captured in thought, philosophy, in the way in which Hegel famously defined it. What exactly is this capture, this Fassung, as the German term is, the capture of a world in crisis that affects us all, and of the symptoms it generates, which come with many facets, or in many facets, and in many shapes. The book captures as defining feature of our time the subjective mechanism and mechanisms of subjectivization that we can witness, and that allow us, or that allow the people, to nevertheless remain composed, gefasst, in a world which is not only heading toward a future catastrophe, but actually undergoing or in the middle of one. So Alenka's book I understand as a capture, Fassung, of the problematic and symptomatic ways in which we, or the people, avoid losing their poise and composure, in which they attempt to keep their cool, their Fassung. And in this sense, it is a Fassung of problematic ways of keeping one's Fassung, a Fassung of Fassung, a meta-Fassung. I put it like this because the powerful diagnosis that Alenka develops is linked to the way in which knowledge can itself, as we just heard, become a defense mechanism against what it knows. If philosophy, again following Hegel, properly understood, should work so that, I'm quoting the famous passage from the Phenomenology, so that it, quote, lays aside the title of love of knowing and be actual knowing, wirkliches Wissen, then philosophy, unquote, then philosophy itself is knowing, a knowing in the absolute sense, namely a knowing of the effects and efficacy of knowledge, and a knowing that concerns knowledge's very constitution, or one could say the truth that is constitutive of knowledge. But this raises the question if, under conditions of knowledge having been turned into a defense mechanism, this mechanism also affects the very status and operativity of philosophy or theory itself. This has to do with how to precisely move from addressing, acknowledging, or over-addressing the crisis as a way of avoiding to think through its traumatic effects, what Alenka wonderfully calls, page 124, if you want to know where, the other side of the crisis, maybe its other scene. This move, how to end analyzing the crisis in a way that allows averting the proper practical analysis of the crisis or working with the crisis, directly concerns the status, the very practice of theory. I'm saying this because, as Alenka says early on in the book, the reason, and that is the name of which theory or philosophy often claims to speak, always had an obscene side. If my intervention would have had a title, it would probably have been, I very well know everything about, I know very well, but nevertheless, or why philosophy? I would like to make 1.5 brief points. First, the elaborate account that Alenka gives of Disawoval Verleugnung and its effects concerns the predominance of a perverted form of reason today, which even has its own aesthetic form, that of the series. There's always another one. There's a fake certainty that after binge watching one series, there will always be another to binge watch. Just as much as after any crisis, there will always be another crisis to worry about. It is a peculiar mode of what Alenka describes as a way of waking up, maybe even of being woke, so that one can continue dreaming, a mode of escape that seems attuned to the alert. I was, when reading the book, reminded of Karl Barth's quite interesting remark that the day after the apocalypse will happen, people will get up and want to buy a newspaper to read about it. Disavowal, ultimately a peculiar mode of repression, does not move what it represses to another place, but hides it in plain view. It derealizes it, makes the extraordinary ordinary, normalizes, naturalizes it, and performs a specific temporal and temporalizing maneuver, which makes the thing that is co-present with us, with me, non-contemporary. The thing thereby is, a surprising reference for me, what Habermas once called normative entkernt, normatively cored. Whatever its normative implication ought to have been, they're suspended. It is, and that's page 17 in Alenka's words, made indifferent. This affects the practical effectivity of a knowledge that one has. I know this is a crisis, I know I have to act, but nevertheless. Knowledge itself, as we just heard, takes on the form of a fetish. It is what allows us to disavow. So it's not only the thing that is disavowed that is made indifferent, that's the point, but it's also the knowledge of the thing that we are disavowed, or that is disavowed. So I would say what Alenka calls doubly perverse, page 77, it's also doubly indifferent. It's an indifference towards the indifference that is produced. This is a symptom of, as she says on page 20, a profound ontological anxiety, namely the fear of being, not the fear of death, but the fear of being deceived, of looking foolish, a fear worse than the fear of death, and somewhat similar to the literary moment in which someone encounters a doppelganger, a double, and cannot but shudder while thinking, oh, is the other, or is it me, the double? Which means that the practical efficacy of anything I presume to know, even the knowledge I get from the authority of modern science, for example, is coextensive with belief. Belief commences with knowledge. For even to believe in the weird things modern science tells us necessitates, as Alenka states on page 40, a leap of faith. So the crisis we're speaking about is a crisis of knowledge, but also a crisis of the belief, or of that which is constitutive of belief, of the leap of faith that is necessary to make knowledge into practically effective knowledge in the first place. So someone needs a leap of faith to effectively assume what one knows. To some extent, I think this is a diagnosis resonant to the one that Kant formulated in What is Enlightenment, where he argues that the absence of courage, the courage to use one's own understanding, leads to what he describes as a fearful incapacitation that is so detrimental that people, I'm quoting Kant, would still be uncertain in jumping over even the narrowest trenches. Put differently, and returning to Alenka's diagnosis, what is perverted is the very status of the leap of faith. There's a blockage that would allow to move this incapacity of jumping, of leaping to logical impossibility, a formula that Alenka uses in her elucidation of symbolic distration. I'm really wondering how this perversion of the leap, think also hic rhodus, hic saltus, is linked to first, the organizational form that allows under present conditions to normalize the absence of any leaping. And what I mean by this is parliamentary democracy, that Badiou once called our holy cow the fetish of contemporary political life and its decline. And secondly, how this perversion, and these are not just questions to Alenka, but I'm really wondering about this. And secondly, how this perversion of the leap of faith is linked to not only the contemporary predominance of conspiracy theory that Alenka brilliantly analyzes, but also to the contemporary predominance of figures like Trump, the grotesque sovereigns. So there seems to be a leap of faith linked to actually endorsing a figure like Trump in the most perverted way. My second brief remark continues this train of thought, I think, because one wonderful argument that Alenka develops is that even the wealthy who claim that they are and everything else is and exists just because of money in the end, do not really believe what they say. They do not really believe that money guarantees their own existence and therefore need someone to believe that they are in charge because of their money. This turns, I think, the screw a little bit further than a wonderful and interesting claim that Frederick Jameson made when he stated that contemporary conspiracy theories fulfill an orientational demand for the people who endorse them. For him, so for Jameson, they were the most catastrophic way of responding to a rational cry for help. People believe mad things because they want to understand what appears to them to be increasingly or entirely mad and incomprehensible. So conspiracy then is a way of acting upon reason's demands that tries to understand what the whole world is about in a phase, in a period in which this world is in crisis. And this manifests, thereby it's a symptom of a crisis of reason itself. You see, this is why I highlighted the obscure underside of reason itself. So it is, for Jameson, it was a rationalism for a state of history and culture, of the absence of any identifiable raison d'etat. One could maybe add to Jameson that along with this, the concentration of capital in the hands of increasingly fewer, I mean, maybe one just needs one hand, poses a specific economic ideological problem for what Jean-Claude Milner once called the Sellerite bourgeoisie, namely the disenfranchised former bourgeoisie. So we get now a bourgeoisie that differs from the former hereditary bourgeoisie insofar as it can actually and does lose its socio-economic position if things don't go well or they don't suck up to the right people. And it knows this to be the case. I once called this the lumpen bourgeoisie, modifying Marx's famous claim, because these groups are imbued with what Adorno, in his analysis of the persistence of right-wing tendencies after the decline of fascism, once called a hatred of socialism, or what they call socialism. That's Adorno. So the bourgeoisie, now turned potential lumpen, rationalized the potential and therefore surprising the actual loss of their own position by what? By blaming not the system or the apparatus that actually caused their loss, but by blaming, and now Adorno again, those who were critical of the system in which they once had a status. So it's never just the system that produces the loss of that strange privilege of the previous bourgeoisie, but it's the people who were critical of the system in the first place, right? So there is something strange happening there. So it's one knows it is the system that produces the problem, but nevertheless, one can say, one can move it somewhere else. So I think both of these accounts, that is Jameson's and Adorno's, are falling short to get to the point that Alenka makes. For Alenka's account, we have to add to this a strange dynamic, I think, that Lacan once called functioning communication, where each side gets their own message back in an inverted form. The rich, who are effectively not controlling capitalism, they're just rich, want to be seen as what they ought to be seen, what they suppose they ought to be seen as, right? Namely as the ones controlling capitalism. While the conspiracy theorists, because there's an other that constantly cares about deceiving them in their own belief system, gives them the absolute certainty that they are worth deceiving, and therefore they socially exist. Right? So you see why it's a form of functioning communication. To end already, Hegel described the method of the phenomenology as one of that he called thoroughgoing, or in Pinkert's translation, self-consummating skepticism. And there's also a form of skepticism inscribed into the very constitution of the well-functioning communication between conspiracy. And it might not be a surprise that there are theorists. Alenka has wonderful passages and points about research. So between conspiracy theorists and the rich or wealthy on the other side, a skepticism with regard to their very own existence and what guarantees that very own existence. So what would it mean to take that skepticism that is at the ground of this functioning communication into what would it take or what would it take to make the skepticism a really thoroughgoing or self-consummating skepticism? I think this must have something to do with mobilizing anxiety, the anxiety that's sort of is problematically averted, or in short, but that's what my thing these days, with a form of courage. I'm curious to hear what you think about that. Thank you.
I think I'm the next to go. Well, thank you, Alenka, first for your presentation, which widened the scope of your book, carried it further, and thank you, Frank, for these comments, most enlightening. I cannot but start with praise. We have become spoiled by Alenka's books, so as to expect nothing less from her, no less than to produce new landmarks with each next book. And this book is written with an overarching gesture, and in a relatively short space of 130 pages, published in a series which caters for manifestos, for manifesto-like interventions of 25,000 words. Yet, in this short space, it encompasses an astonishing amount of material, following the red thread of Disawoval, and addressing, on the one hand, some of the most pressing problems of the present day, the disavowal as a prevailing stance of our social moment, the general social state of mind, with knowledge as a new form of sort of postmodern disavowal, and the dwindling authority of science as the traditional bearer of knowledge. And in the last part, the plague of conspiracy theories and their libidinal economy, the counterpart to the structure of disavowal, its flip side. And on the other hand, between the opening and the closing part, the central and the demanding part of necessary forging conceptual tools, addressing head-on some of the most pressing theoretical concerns that psychoanalysis is faced with, like what is castration and why castration against the grain of the time which takes this to be the original sin of psychoanalysis, is maintaining castration in fellows, etc. What is the genesis of the unconscious? And centrally, at the heart of the book, a return to a thorough interpretation of Descartes' cogito, the entry into modernity and its connection with the subject of the unconscious. So thus, the book seamlessly combines the intervention into the immediate actuality with the hardline theoretical work. Within strictly set limits, it's like an infinite expansion, as if the tighter the limitations, the more shrink back within their boundaries. The French have the expression of l'art de bien dire, the art of saying well, and Lacan extending it to l'éthique de bien dire, the ethics of putting it well in an apposite formula, a slogan, with the utter economy of means in a few words. A few words that have the capacity to become not just a proverb, but like a theme. And here I propose, I just list an even dozen of my choice, of particularly striking formulas. You know that Deleuze once wrote 4 poetic formulas to summarize Kant's philosophy. So here, like 12 formulas to summarize this book. Each of them would demand a further comment. So I just list them. The first one is the fire within the fire. I won't go on explaining it, but this I think is the most precise and minimal formula of the famous dream of the Father, don't you see that I'm burning? Then belief is the consequence of knowledge, not something that knowledge dissipates, but a consequence of knowledge. Then a greedy and self-enjoying asubjective system. I'll come back to this. Then money contains a je ne sais quoi that no money can buy. I think it's wonderful, the formula of money. And particularly now with the world's richest billionaires hijacking the democratically elected executive power. Then collateral knowledge of the unconscious. Then cogito as an escape into being, or throwing thought in the waste bin, as Lacan put it. Then the unconscious as a non-being that is. And then I don't think in order to be and to enjoy. And even better, on the same page 70, I'm smarter than to think. I'm smarter than to think. Then the acceptance of castration as the most inaccessible disavowal of castration there could be, page 76. Then the reflexive formulas of the disavowal of disavowal itself, the repression of repression, the enjoyment of enjoyment. Then better an evil God than no God at all, as a formula of conspiracy theories. And another formula of conspiracy theories, I am being deceived, therefore I am, as a sort of cogito of conspiracy theories. And okay, this is a short list of very striking formulas that have the immediate effect, that they're memorable, and they act like instant interventions. And this dozen could be extended. Now, my comments or additional remarks will be sort of minor, and I'll be repeating some points that are already Alenka and Frank brought up. And they're connected with some of these formulas. And first of all, the status of the big other, something I was trying to struggle with in my book on rumors and other writings, something that we are collectively concerned with in various ways. The decline, the demise, the dwindling of the big other seems to be the formula that presents the best diagnosis of our times. And Alenka considers the decline of objective truth, the loss of faith in science and its authority. And in a wider perspective, one can speak about the decline of the Enlightenment authority of reason. The Enlightenment considered as a movement of establishing the true big other of reason and science, as opposed to the false others of transcendence and beyond, and of kings and paternal authority. So all these instances of the other, of the Enlightenment, seem to be put into jeopardy, be through the prevailing mechanisms of disavowal, admitting knowledge, but diffusing its symbolic impact through the disadmission itself, freely espousing, I know very well, but in a way that it entails no consequences. We just proceed as if this knowledge is inoperational, producing no effects, being integrated into the pursuit of the normal state of affairs, and even more, sustaining it, making it more sustainable and immune to critique and transformation by its admission and seeming espousal. And this is particularly endemic in our era, where all information is freely available, more than at any time in history, but information doesn't amount to knowledge that would have an impact. Or be through the conspiracy theories now mushrooming and steadily advancing, and possibly there is a process that they will tendentially tip the balance in favor of conspiracies, and the mechanism of denial of the established knowledge supported by science and social authority, not through disavowal, but through the adamant belief in another kind of truth that is covered by universal deception, a plot, thus maintaining the other as the great deceiver. Now, Alenka has previously and in this book presented a criticism of this massive diagnosis of the demise of the big other as the defining mark of postmodern times, pointing out that the big other is alive and well, only beyond our reach. But this is not the big other of the Enlightenment, entities of reason, science, objective knowledge, but an increasingly unfathomable and intractable big other, to whom we are yielding authority precisely through the seeming demise of the big other. Or to put it into formula, the more the big other seems to be declining, the stronger it is. This is where the formula comes in of the dramatic possibility of a greedy and self-enjoying asubjective system of which no one is really in control. So this is precisely something that is obfuscated by pointing out the subjective financial interest, profits, pursuit of power, and the enjoyment of its agents. So the brutal reality of capitalism, which is beyond the perversion and the pathology of its bearers, and the capitalism as a structural conspiracy, as it were, that precisely the conspiracy theories obfuscate. And it's perhaps a pity that Alenka didn't include, due to restrictions of space, her further analysis of conspiracy theories, which she published in her treatment of Don't Look Up, the 2021 movie, where she proposed the most apposite formula of conspiracy without a conspiracy theory, or with variations, conspiracy theory without conspiracy, or conspiracy theory without theory. In the movie, we have this sort of spontaneous conspiracy against this scientifically attested comet that would produce catastrophe, the end of the world, a spontaneous conspiracy of the political establishment, the corporate world, and the liberal media, but without a mastermind, without a master plan, with no plot and no steering center. It looks like the irrational development of late capitalism as this self-enjoying asubjective system functions just as a kind of conspiracy beyond conspiracy theories, which is far worse than what any conspiracy theory can imagine in their wildest speculations. So I can add another reflection of the reflexive formulas of repression, or disavowal of disavowal, or the acceptance of castration as the greatest disavowal of castration, erecting a sort of rampart against castration by its admission. So all these formulas point toward a new constellation where it seems that the classical notion of ideology loses its ground, and Alenka almost never uses the term ideology. The constellation implies that everything is out there in the open for everyone to see. What can be more blatantly obvious than Trump, someone who really doesn't suffer from repression or shame and proudly displays greed, self-interest in every public utterance? This is a whole new case of the post-Parliament letter. The best place to hide is in the open, and even pointing out this is the Parliament letter. The seemingly total disclosure and exposure. And this is a posture that seems to be utterly immune to facts. The 20,000 or so easily checked lies can't dismantle this position of enunciation, but actually enhance it. Endow it with an aura of synthetically produced authenticity and charisma beyond mere concern with petty reality and fact-checking. The more everything is admitted and exposed, the more exposed the better, constantly seeking the center of attention, the more the disavowal is firmly in place, in strange connivance and close collaboration with conspiracy theories. The two facets seem to be joining hands in supporting each other. Hence, the urgent timeliness of this book, which places the present most worrisome acute predicament into a larger pattern and its theoretical dismantling analysis. But where does this leave us? Is there a way out? Can one counteract this seemingly all-pervasive Disavowl is the hidden pathology of our age, hidden precisely by everything being admitted and out in the open. How can one use knowledge as the means of enlightenment of those who freely accept knowledge and are therefore immune to knowledge? Inoculated against enlightenment by accepting it, inoculating against castration by flaunting it. And to be sure, this is a theoretical book, and in some parts a demanding and far-reaching philosophical treatise. It is not a book of pragmatic advice or instructions for action, but as a book of theory, it has all the qualities of a theoretical intervention as opposed to interpretation, in the best sense of intervening in the present conjuncture in a way that can indeed make a difference. Despite the dark colors of catastrophic situations depicting and taking apart, it still doesn't fall into the trap of a particular kind of disavowal that so many writings of critical theory in the widest sense are prey to, namely of enjoying one's own despondency and powerlessness, enjoying the lamentation and helplessness, or even the position of the beautiful soul castigating the disastrous state of the world. Its effect is rather the interpellation of a wake-up call, but a wake-up call to something that doesn't amount to waking up to reality, and thus making it possible to dream on. It's a wake-up call to not waking up, but rather confronting the nightmare. And I take its dozen or so poetic formulas, not merely as so many perspicacious points of diagnosis, but also as battle cries. Thank you.
How do I enter?
You
What do
enter.
You
just
in?
start.
You are in.
You just
Just it.
I'm in. Okay, I put myself. Now I see myself. Okay. First, nonetheless, one remark. Don't be afraid. I will not go into details into that disgusting intervention. You know what shocked me, and I hope you all share the same sentiment. That those, what was 10, 15 seconds, or those images, how boring they were. I mean, the idea was this should shock us in the middle of a theoretical development. No, it was boring. I was annoyed. I was waiting. My God, when will Alenka be back? The interest was for me in Alenka's theory. So, Alenka, you know what was my big fear? That my fear, but I was wrong, of course, was that somehow you didn't notice it and you went on with your theory. So that when we will get back to you, you will say, now, after I made my basic point, allow me to conclude. So that, and this is where we are today. This was an important lesson, something that even when I was young, something like this to interrupt a talk would be a big shock, whatever. No, sorry, it's boring. Let me go to the point. It's very important, I think, to read the two books together. Mladen's Rumors and Alenka's Disawoval. Why? They both achieve a miracle. In what sense? They take a term which, for many people, even many philosophers, appears just as a marginal psychological category. Yeah, we know rumors, they are no blah, blah, of no philosophical interest, or disavowal. Yeah, we half-lie, we don't mean it seriously. But the miracle is how they take a concept which doesn't deal with some big mega philosophical topic and elevate it into a crucial concept which reaches both directions, down to our most concrete experience, political, social experience. Mladen is right, you cannot understand today's politics without understanding the paradoxical status of rumor and Alenka Disavowl. Both critical concepts. So let's go to Alenka. Sorry, it's my usual dirty joke, but I really hate her, and I'll tell you why. I could say, yeah, but we were all talking for decades about what she's saying, but you know what she does? Here comes my envy and hatred. She finds the right word. I write too much. I was jumping around and so on. And then with Alenka, you have this element almost, I'm not afraid to use the term element of epiphany. So, something wrong? No. So let me go briefly through, I will not be too long, a couple of points about Alenka's book. I think, and she does it, that we should go systematically through, it's not just Disawoval, through different modes of how individuals, but especially the social body, react to a traumatic threat experience, whatever you call it. First, we have a simple denial. And this denial has today different forms. It's not just the Trumpian populist forum. No, there is no crisis of global warming, of environment, forget this, let's just go on. What interests me is that there is a certain tendency in the left. For example, my ex-follower, who, I take this not in a personal way, now turned against me, Fabio Vighi, who claims that all the big crises that we are perceiving as a threat to our survival today, COVID, virus crisis, ecological crisis, the threat of a military conflict, new world war, he even, and I almost like this, makes a step further and said that if it will be needed, the system will invent a new crisis, which will be aliens. Just for him, all these crises are just inventions by the capitalist system to justify austerity measures, keeping working class under discipline, and so on and so on. So that's, for me, very interesting how the same approach, although not in the same way, of course, can be shared by both sides. Then we have fascination. And Alenka and Mladen demonstrated this very well. How? There is a certain way of being fascinated by the threat of a total disintegration catastrophe. Or there is an obvious surplus enjoyment in it, which is not even necessarily a negative one. We also have utopia, authentic utopian moments in some of these catastrophic mini-series. For example, did you see the series The Last of Us, where a young girl, child, and her elder, they encounter each other in a contingent way, protector, wander around the devastated America, and they, in episode 5, I think, they enter a small city which, in contrast to other places, functions very well. And one of them said, but wait a minute, you function here as if you are in communism. And they say, yeah, of course, we have communism here. Only that type of series you can get this. So again, with all the ambiguity, we have fascination with catastrophe. And just to return from brief moment to Mladen, I think that rumors are also in this sense ambiguous. For example, reading histories of revolution, French Revolution, October and others, you know that rumors played crucial role in them, not just bad role, but there was a tension and then a rumor, which even afterward, it became clear that it was a false rumor about some atrocity committed by those still in power, triggered the revolutionary event. So we have this, and now I come to the third strategy, not denial, in the sense of as if nothing horrible is happening, not disavowal, sorry, not fascination, but disavowal. And I see Alenka's mega contribution, as she described it already, this, this reversal of how it's not only the standard disavowal, in the sense of I know very well, but even here, with what Freud, even here, there can be complications. For example, I've written about this years ago, and Alenka also, I think, how, maybe I exaggerate here, but how does since a typical psychoanalytic patient is today relatively educated, you know, we no longer have this zero level where the patient comes and says some dream, and then the analyst talks him, oh, but you know that that figure is really your father, and that you want to kill him, and that the lady you are approaching is your mother, and so on. No. To refer, we've written already about it, to that dream when the patient tells Freud, I don't know who that woman is, but it's for sure not my mother. I claim that today's typical patient would have rather said, I'm not quite sure who that woman is, but I'm sure it has something to do with my mother. I mean, this is, for me, the way knowledge itself can be a mask against truth. But now, sorry for this blah, blah, Alenka, now I come to my crucial point, which is already in you. I just want a direction from you. Did I miss something? And so on. It's very important how both of you, Mladen and Alenka, emphasize that if disavowal means you somehow neutralize knowledge about how things are, the way out is not simply let's get rid of all these phantasmatic obfuscations and finally confront, accept the way things really are. No, I think, and here, Alenka, this is the only serious thing I have to tell you. I risk in my book Against Progress to even use again here the term disavowal, but in a positive sense. Like, yes, I go through, analyze everything and so on, and I don't cheat. I really assume it, but nonetheless, I go on with my, to put it in pathetic terms, love or revolutionary activity on so on. The logic is here not simply je sais bien, mais comme même. The logic is, yes, I know very well, but I have also noticed that my knowledge itself is not simply objective knowledge. It has lacks, it's already biased and so on. And because of this, I refer here to my good friend, the best theorist of catastrophes, Jean-Pierre Dupuy. The only way to actively intervene is to accept that the catastrophe is our fate. this paradoxically should not immobilize us. No, catastrophe is our fate, but we go on fighting. This is, of course, connected with what Mladen and Alenka, these are crucial things, mentioned about the status of the big other. I think we should here put things openly. There are many theories, even those on the top of Lacanian hierarchy, like Jacqueline Miller in some passages, who claim that today we live in the expression Miller once used already a year ago was universal foreclosure, like that simply there is no big other. I think that the formula is not there is no big other. I agree with Mladen. The big, after every fiasco of the big other returns or is here in its very fiasco stronger than ever. Here comes my beloved quantum physics. The lesson of quantum physics is that the big other, which in quantum physics is synonymous with what Einstein as an atheist called God. You know, it's very interesting what you said, Frank, how this applies to Einstein. For him also, there is no contradiction between knowledge and belief. He said, science needs belief, belief in kind of Spinozian God, belief that God doesn't cheat, that God is a consistent, big other, universal order, which should surprise us in its beauty, and so on and so on. So God doesn't cheat. To this, Niels Bohr, I quoted this at least 10 times in my book, provided his famous answer: don't tell God what to do. And I think the quantum notion here is not that God is cheating, but that God himself is cheated. The big other is necessary, but incomplete, can be cheated, things happen in between, and so on and so on. So, since we have to leave some time for debate, I will stop here, just repeating the absolutely basic point. I'm tempted, would you risk using, Alenka, the same term? You know, we are in a new situation and we always have this problem. As Mladen pointed out, fascism. Okay, but is this fascism or not? Even with Varoufakis, feudalism, I'm not sure. So, but I am tempted to claim that the right way to act is to fully assume the knowledge, not je sais bien mais quand même, yes, I know this, but then to act as if this knowledge is not full. You cannot ever ground action fully in knowledge. That's the Stalinist dream. I do the analysis of future and it tells me what to do. No, there must be a gap in knowledge. In this sense, only we can disavow knowledge in a positive way to act. Am I going too far here, Alenka? I finished.
No, thank you very much. Not only Slavoj, but everybody who also spoke before you. I mean, you presented the arguments of my book in a much better way than I was able to at the beginning.
Then retire from press the book and propagate ours.
Yeah, precise. No, I mean, not in the book, they are okay, but here I was only able to
No, be serious.
Yeah.
Be serious.
Okay,
I meant
no,
it seriously. Sorry, I will shut up. Yeah.
Perhaps since this was a direct question, and I think I will just very briefly not simply reply to you, but add some additional comment based on your comments. So starting with Slavoj, because this question that you asked at the end, if this form, yeah, this is a brilliant formula, because I think when you said that it is fully acknowledges something, nevertheless going on with your pursuit, while acknowledging that this knowledge precisely itself is not full. I think this is a very, very good formula because in my view, what distinguishes the disavowal, as I deploy this term in the book, from what you call in yours, this kind of good disavowal, which actually help us to go on and almost in the sense of soyons réalistes, demandons l'impossible, you go on even if everything seems to be against you and it's kind of irrational that you go on anyway. The difference is precisely that I think in this disavowal, let's say the bad disavowal, first of all, the aim there is not for anything to change or to happen. It is just to preserve the status quo, which is not the same. And the other difference is that precisely in this kind of a good disavowal, knowledge itself is not used as a fetish that then allows you to were not affected, but precisely is kind of also exposed or taken as precisely not whole. Knowledge in itself is there, but this is not all, or it is not all. And there is precisely this moment that at least to some kind of extent, opens up this kind of suffocating thing that seems to be happening here. So my point is, and I think it's a brilliant formula to say, I know very well, but let's say the non-wholeness, the non-completeness of this knowledge is precisely what makes it possible to pursue and not simply ignoring what I know. So I don't know, there was this thing about the big other that kept coming up in all the discussions. So perhaps I will simply take this as a kind of threat and address, like really briefly, some things. For instance, okay, to remain another moment with Slavoj, you mentioned this Viggy's argument about how capitalism, or they will invent a new crisis just to keep us to be able to enforce new austerity measures or whatever ways of subduing and subjecting us, exploiting us. I think this is again a very good example of precisely the need for the big other. It points to the fact that somebody is in charge of this capital, of this monster that we call capital. Someone is in charge, and everything that happens there is designed in a certain way. And so there is a kind of, and this is precisely the kind of solace that we should take away. And again, perhaps introduced here also this term of uncompleteness. It is not, it does, obviously, there are things that are done on purpose that serve certain, but the idea that there is some big other who knows exactly what it is doing and why with this capitalism, I think it's a defense against precisely this other big other, which is precisely not consistency in this way, but which nevertheless very, very much exists. And I would perhaps relate this to what, for instance, Frank, you said about this strange leap of faith that makes people perform this leap of faith and trust Trump. I mean, many things can be said here, and it's a very interesting question of these different, or perversions, as you call it, of the leap of faith. But one of the things at stake here, again, is precisely this kind of leap, which based on all the doubts that we have, brings you to a kind of safe, secure space. It is precisely in this modality of better, a very evil, vulgar, whatever, big other than no big other. There is a certain thing that goes on there, and which is not so much about the risk. I mean, because usually we use this term of leap of faith precisely as implying a certain risk. You literally jump into the void, out of which, let's say, the new big other will emerge. But here what happens is simply you leave the distance between yourself in a certain big other which already proposes itself as your savior. So it is not the same as the leap of faith where you actually risk the ground also on which you stand when you are doing this leap of faith. I don't know if this makes sense, but so, and I really like, Frank, this way in which you introduce your big theme topics, the courage into this at the end, because as you put it, is a way of mobilizing anxiety, because as you well know, very often these two are being opposed to each other, like anxiety as something which is actually the opposite of courage, or something that completely prevents it from taking place. But I think the much more interesting way of relating them is precisely this kind of mobilization, or you actually working with anxiety in a way that is that produces the acts of courage. So I really like this this proposal. And yeah, and I don't know, Mladen also talked about the big other and this thing that we were, I mean, yeah, I also did this many years ago in relation to Miller, as Slavoj mentioned, that it's a little bit too quick just to say everything is falling apart, big other is disintegrating. No, its status has changed. It is not that it is simply there is no big other, but all these things that we are witnessing and the logic that we are entangled in is precisely the way in which this new big other functions. And so in relationship to this openness and saying everything out loudly and openly, displaying your nakedness and so on. I mean, two things are really important. One is something that a remark that I guess Slavoj, you made already some time ago, how precisely we should not take this in this sense that there is really, that now we see the thing itself, the naked, whatever, person or leader. There is something here which is precisely what I call the new custom of power. Nakedness is not simply nakedness that shows itself as nakedness and makes us unable to say anything more. This nakedness itself is a new custom. It is worn on. Castration is worn on. It is not simply, I'm not ashamed to show my castration. No, this shameless display is a new custom. It is a new appearance, as Genève would put it. It is not simply, so this is why I'm interested in precisely how this new, as I think really Genève was, new appearances of power, not that now it goes without appearance, but that the very nature in which this appearance function has profoundly changed. So I don't know. I mean, there are so many things that could be said, but I think I will simply stop here. Perhaps just saying that, as Frank, you mentioned at the beginning, this question of boredom as opposed to this excitation mode. It is a very important topic. I also just now, since we are doing this in the framework of EGS, I have a new student, Anur Sarkisian, who is precisely working on this question of boredom and its possible, ontological and political relevance. So I think this concept will have some kind of further future, and perhaps, in relation to anxiety, courage, and some other things. But I will stop now. So I don't know if there is any other thing that any of you listening to each other's remarks would like to add. Or no?
Can I add something in praise of Frank Ruda? Not be afraid. One sentence, literally. Okay, two. It's very important what you said, Alenka, because Frank Ruda, now to Frank, don't you see, here I disagree with Badiou, who I admire him, blah, blah, but he nonetheless in his analysis of big Greek tragedies, at least at some point, prefers Aeschylus to Sophocles. His idea is Aeschylus is courage, Sophocles is anxiety. But I don't think they can be opposed. True act needs both.
I think this is really, I think it is too simple also politically in terms of how this is articulated. But I mean, this is.
Can I say one word? Because it's interesting. He makes it sound there as if he just. I mean, he has this formula where he says, "Well, Lacan sides with Sophocles, but points towards Aeschylus." Right. That is his formula. And I think that this a few pages earlier in that very book, Theory of the Subject, he says, there is no difference between courage and anxiety. It is the same thing. So courage is not a virtue, but it is the same. So it means, I mean, I think coming very, very close to what we, and I'm also reminded, you know, when you were in you, Slavoj, were in his seminar in Paris once, and you raised the very, I think, difficult question to him. How do you identify an event as an event? You have no concept that serves for that identification. And he said, I have one. It's courage. He said, and I thought, and I think this is really interesting because just like against the background of what we just said right now, it must mean that he has to give an answer like it is a form of identifying a point of anxiety and work with it, a certain dosage of anxiety. And that is what takes courage. So there is no difference conceptual. So courage is just working with anxiety, right?
Can I just support you with literally, then I shut up. I agree with you. You converted me. You know in what sense? I also asked him, but I think it can be answered by Badiou. The most stupid reproach to him, because people take event in this imprecise sense, or big political upheaval, and then they ask, how then do you distinguish between a good event, revolution, and fascism? Wasn't Hitler also an event? No, there was no courage. It was Hitler's event, Hitlerian event didn't have authentic anxiety behind it. It was a courage, but not based on authentic anxiety. That's how I would, even at the theoretical level, following you, maybe try to dispel this boring question. I don't know, so many idiots are fascinated by this, but isn't then everything an event and so on or whatever, no?
Yeah,
Can I say one thing? No, shut up, sorry.
Who was, I don't know.
Is there an example?
I was just saying, I would like to say that this, I really think this is crucial. And also, I think it brings us back to what you said, Slavoj, about catastrophe being our fate, but we go on fighting. And I think, again, this is one of these kind of formulas that Mladen was talking about before, because it is really, first of all, it takes away this kind of fascination with catastrophe, which is always somewhere ahead, and we will now have to avoid it in this way or another. And it actually resonates with Mladen's formulation just a moment ago with how if we wake up into the nightmare itself, it doesn't simply mean that then we get completely lost and paralyzed, but that we are actually able to fight within the nightmare, not simply being, and perhaps this is what is called courage, that it is not saying, okay, now the nightmare arrived, so I can no longer, I'm completely paralyzed, or I'm kind of victim to complete anxiety, but precisely fighting the nightmare, from within, and not simply trying to avoid it, or or even thinking that you can actually avoid it in this kind of way. So,
Can I briefly answer a question which is popping up down there, really briefly? An example of nakedness as the new custom. Okay, it's not exactly nakedness, but I would say what we saw in the stupid pornography, hardcore. You see all the nakedness, but you know, and I know this not from personal experience, but from watching very interesting movies about the making of hardcore. There is no more customized, less spontaneous genre than hardcore. The expressions of woman face, everything is totally customized, I saw.
Yeah, and I mean, I can add another example, which is, the discussion which is related to the other book, What is Sex? You know, if you show the sexual organs, you show nothing about sexuality. I mean, this is precisely why we cover them up, not because they would display some ultimate truth of sex, but because they are not able to. And this kind of imaginary is itself mostly there in order to suggest that there, I mean, the covering up in order to suggest that there is actually something there that can reveal the ultimate thrill of sexuality.
Mladen, it seemed to me that you were waiting to say something, Mladen, or am I wrong?
No, not necessarily. No, I would perhaps add the question of the big other. I think Aaron Schuster has a very good formula in this trio book where he proposes three versions of this, the existence of the big other, three versions of like Trump in relation to this. And one version is, I'm just the servant of the big other. There is a big other, I'm just doing what is necessary by the laws of history, whatever, as I see that.
Stalin. That's Comrade Stalin.
Yeah, that's the Stalinist. That would be Stalinist. The other version is there is no big other. So anybody is free to do anything. And the third version is I am the big other. I am setting the rules. So you have the sort of a broken kettle argument because all three versions are somehow being enacted. And perhaps the cracks, the inconsistency of the three versions is something that opens a chance, a gap for something, intervention. Precisely not the big planned thing with somebody in charge, but the inconsistency of the other is something that opens the field. And I would just say that I found very useful the formula that Frank proposed, the question of the leap of faith and the absence of leap of faith, precisely. Not the absence of knowledge, but the absence of concomitant, as it were, leap of faith that is necessary for knowledge to be implemented. And the leap of faith, Alenka gave this precision precisely not into certainty, into somebody who acts as a savior, but the risky leap of faith where you don't quite know what you're in for. They act as a risk. And this is also the formula you propose, Slavoj, that no action can be quite grounded in the previous knowledge. And it's taking into account the lacking nature of one's own knowledge, which is not something that should paralyze us, but actually which is the very basis of action, which demands action as a continuation. So these are just a few remarks of some formulas that I found really useful and interesting in the discussion. Just very brief.
Here I will be brief, then you finish, Alenka. Frank, here we didn't have time to. I think that your talk about leap of faith and so on was very important. Why? Now I'm talking as what I'm already, people laugh at me, Christian atheist and so on. This is what I mean, how Jameson began with claiming that the most useful concept in theology for historical material is predestination and so on. No, there are so many precious things in theology. We should shamelessly appropriate them. Sorry. Alenka.
Continuing in this way, I would add, I mean, this is also part of the discussion in the book, that even the social symbolic authority of science itself is based on a leap of faith. Because
Sure.
I make this distinction between the way the science operates and the fact that we cannot, each of us, understand and follow and verify this functioning, I mean, this calculus or whatever. So there is a difference between the way that science operates and the way in which it functions as a social authority. We trust science simply because it is science. There is a leap of faith. Okay, and we trust it because we know that it has certain methods which are not based on anything else but what they discover. But nevertheless, there is this gap here, which is important also in the functioning, if you want, of reason, of science, or whatever, and which is then precisely taken away or attacked when some, for instance, conspiracy theories or people like that claim that actually, no, we don't trust science because we are ourselves scientific, and we think that one should trust no authority. So we just apply the scientific method to all these claims. And I think this is kind of interesting. And I also would like to simply add here, I saw in the comments that Chris Zimmerman recommended Yuval Kremnitzer's book, The Emperor's New Nudity, in relation to this debate. And I strongly would like to do the same, to encourage you to read this book, which is a really excellent study of many of the things that we were talking about.
I just rejoin you, Alenka. Yuval is my guy. Why? I had a debate with him in Israel about translation of my sublime object, and he told me, since you talk too much, you means me, Slavoj, I will use a code word to signal stop. And the code word, of course, from Lubitsch's to be or not to be, you know, when that concentration camp Erhard, the German, shouts "Schuld" when something goes wrong to his assistant, and the debate ended that we were shouting at each other "Schulds" all the time. So yes, do that book, Yuval Kremnitzer, yes.
Can I add one thing to what we just talked about? I mean, I think the proposal that Slavoj made, that there should be a form of, I don't know, emancipatory disavowal that allows to account for how we can never derive action from knowledge. Would the same not also hold for fascination? I was right. I mean, returning to your categories, because I recently read this. T.J. Clark had this piece in the London Review of Books, where he was basically saying what is happening with Trump is a decline of an empire, but is entertaining spectacle. Right. So it's an enjoyable decline. There must also be a different kind of fascination, so that exactly, I think, let's say what the good disavowal allows for, that it's in Alenka's terms now, what it's against the status quo, and it inscribes into knowledge that knowledge is not all, and thereby doesn't function as a fetish. Then one gets if that is one's background, then one also needs and can maybe develop a different theory of fascination. It's not fascination with the decline, the spectacle of the decline of power, but a different type of fascination.
Yeah. No, me again, sorry. I agree with you in what sense? Judith Butler published, I think, in Guardian, a reaction to latest Trump's obscenities, where she goes into, for me, this falsely rationalist dimension. We are all just mad, fascinated by Trump. No, I think that it's not enough to say, let's, in a cool way, rationally analyze it. You must be, in certain sense, deeply shocked to see what's going on. I don't believe you could say, oh, let's just analyze it and so on. We lose ethical dimension if you must be horrified by what's happening.
So we end with horror?
Why not?
But not with that horror movie substance, Demi Moore and so on. It's not good, I think.
haven't seen it too.
It was nice. We should do more these things. My God.
We can't, and we continue with all this. Thank you, everyone. Alenka, are you okay for us to finish at this point?
Yes, I mean, yeah, absolutely. I just really would like to thank everybody again to be here and to involve with this book in the on this level, which I really appreciate. And yeah, we'll see what comes next. And I'm fine with us finishing here, if this is your question.
Also, thank you all for participating in this event on the behalf of the EGS, and looking forward to seeing you to some other future events that will follow. So, thanks everyone.